introduction. Yeah, Dan asked me to do this webinar because I just recently attended the Heating Northeast Expo 2012 up in Saratoga Springs. And I know we have a hand thing here, but perhaps one or twice during the presentation, I may just ask you to raise your hand to say yes to a question. I'm just curious if anybody here has attended one of the Heating Northeast or attended this recent conference in Saratoga Springs. If you could raise your hand if you have. Okay, so I don't see too many hands. So my purpose here as attending this was really trying to give you an overview of what this is about, and I consider myself still relatively a newbie in the biomass world, even though I've been in forestry for a long time. And for those of you that may not know, this was just a great meeting, and it started originally. This is about biomass. Everything you want to know about biomass, pretty much. It's a trade show and all the policy things and revolving around that. It used to be called Heating the Northeast with Biomass. It was started in 2009 in Manchester, and the objective is to bring together leaders in renewable energy industry to explore the potential of local renewable biomass energy in the Northeast, primarily in the New England area. There's a wide range of people there, of hosts, and sponsors, of government, industry associations, nonprofits. This is a place to go to really learn about what is going on with the biomass industry, especially in the Northeast. And coming down into Pennsylvania and Maryland are definitely kind of out of the what they consider the Northeast right now, but I think it's moving down. So with that, my purpose here was to kind of give an overview, and I attended all the sessions. Some I attended, I couldn't attend, all the breakouts, but the idea was just to give you some comments and some what I thought were some of the highlights that might be of interest to you to kind of learn about what is happening with the biomass industry in the Northeast. And you'll see the web page there on this page here. Obviously, this was just last week, the conference, so a lot of the PDFs from the presentations, I'm not sure if they're posted yet, but they will be, and all the presentations from the past 3 years are posted as well. So it's a great place to get some information if you like it. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. Before I get into the conference, though, I'm just curious if anybody's seen this document. What really got me interested in this whole area was about 2 years ago, which was the second year of the Heating the Northeast conference. It's 2010. That all these folks involved, the Pellet Institute and biomass, and some of the big leaders in biomass in the Northeast, got together and kind of came up with a bold vision for where renewable biomass can go in the Northeast, with some very specific targets, as well as what are some of the benefits. And proposing 25% of all thermal energy requirements in the Northeast could be met with renewable energy resources by the year 2025. And they called this a bold vision. This really got me interested because it showed a sense of vision that these folks had. And what I've noticed in the last 3 years that I've been going, just a lot of excitement and a lot of progress being made. So that's why I think this was a really excellent conference to go to. And like I'll say at the very end, I recommend folks that have interest in the area going next year. This document itself, though, kind of just lays out a lot of the benefits, this economic, social, and environmental benefits of this vision of using renewable biomass, which in the Northeast, a lot of the heat, thermal energy is provided by heating oil, so displacing a lot of heating oil. That's basically the case. And also, of course, the thing that really comes down to jobs and as well as the environmental benefits, but and keeping money in rural communities. One important statistic that came out of the conference, I heard in one of the presentations I'll mention later, is that at least in Maine, okay, every dollar spent on fuel oil in a community, only 15 cents of that dollar stays in that community. The rest goes elsewhere. And that's not the case with renewable biomass, so this is really a way to keep money in local communities, and I thought that was a great number to keep in mind as you move ahead. So overall, who was there? Well, there were a lot of people there. The attendance has, I think, increased over the last few years. the first 3 years, 2009, 10, and 11, the conference was held in Manchester, New Hampshire, and this is the first year they've gone out trying to extend the area a little bit to Saratoga Springs, New York, which is just outside of Albany. 450 attendees. It was a really nice conference facility, but they had a huge exhibit hall, and you can see there were all kinds of, all the new technology with regards to outdoor burners, a lot of indoor pellet boilers, as well as pellets and other products. Down on the lower right, there's a gentleman there from Northern Woodlands Magazine as well. And so very interesting to learn about the latest technology. And there was also an outside exhibit area. So a lot of trailers demonstrating the burning of these different things. And one really neat exhibit you'll see there is the Sandry truck. Sandry is a large company that is getting into the pellet home delivery business, which is where pellets need to go to become a commodity. One thing I've learned is that for the pellet industry really to take off, pellets have to be a commodity that you can go out and buy, like oil or gas, and have delivered to your home. And like you see on the upper right picture there, basically, the pellets are blown into a hopper that can be stored, and then you just have a boiler, little tiny boiler in your basement like you would be for gas or oil. And so this is one of their delivery trucks. What I did kind of to prepare this PowerPoint was just to kind of give you an overview of the conference itself. It was the 21st through the 23rd of March. The 21st was an optional day, and it focused a lot on biomass heating, especially on agricultural biomass, I believe. I didn't go to that, but I understand it was well attended by about 100 people. And the main conference itself is 2 days, or day and a half, really, the 22nd, a full day, and then the 23rd, a half day. Each of those days had a plenary session or a combined session, and then some breakouts sessions on each day. And the interesting thing they did this year was just trying to reach new audiences. One of the biggest challenges in the biomass industry that I've seen is that trying to educate architects and engineers and HVAC professionals about biomass energy systems. So they actually had a general session. So each breakout session had 3 tracks, one for a general session, one targeted to architects, engineers, and HVAC, and then another one targeted to economic development. I only went to the general sessions, but again, all those PDFs for the other ones will be posted, and you can check them out. So a lot of good information in all those presentations. The first day, what I'd like to do on the first opening plenary session, of course, there was a master of ceremonies and a welcome by the conference chair, but the 2 very interesting presentations, and I learned a lot from these. I just wanted to highlight some of the tidbits of information I took away from these opening remarks by Frank Murray, who's the president of the NYSERDA group, which is a quasi-public, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the other gentleman who was very interesting, the keynote address was by Carlton Oaten, who is the director or president of the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, and I'll explain that as well. But some really good things to think about, and some suggestions for the biomass industry as it continues to develop. So again, if you have any questions, I realize this is kind of an overview. I want to make it as concise and poignant, as interesting as possible. So, but if you do have a specific question, just type it in. Let's first look at that presentation by Frank Murray with NYSERDA. And basically, this is again, a public, quasi-public organization, $650 million budget in New York State. And they're all about energy. And they are supported by an energy surcharge on electricity, and I think it's probably on fuel oil too, I'm not sure. But basically $650 million. And the interesting thing is they basically only have a couple of $1 million, if that's really committed to biomass. So like a lot of state energy organizations, even understanding and getting into the biomass area is something relatively new. And for an organization this size with this type of budget, they are just kind of pressing the edge of the envelope. But he did make some interesting points. And the thing I found interesting, he kind of made the analogy that what's happening in the biomass industry with biomass fuels and appliances is akin to what the evolution of the oil heating industry probably 30 years ago. Um, so basically, back then, you had oil burners. They were very inefficient. The fuel was dirty. There was a lot of emissions. Service and delivery networks were not that good. So NYSERD has done a lot of work over the years in terms of developing better, partnering with academia and industry to build better oil appliances and things like that to develop, a delivery system now that is very efficient. And all the burners are efficient, but it's still fossil fuel. So the challenges he related to were kind of some of the things that I guess have been akin in the oil industry as well, in terms of a wide range of efficiencies and technology. And with wood, this is definitely true. There's more particulates from residential wood burners compared to all commercial generation. And there's this big major challenge of replacing old residential systems, old wood stoves, with more efficient ones post 1990 when they were EPA regulated. But there's still a lot of those old wood stoves. So, you know, grant programs or other incentives to help so that people transition, get rid of these older stoves is really essential to clean up the emissions issue, especially at the residential scale. Um, he also made the point that high efficiency and economic development and low emissions, those should be the key objectives of a biomass development program. And we all know that the fuel is cheap. Um, he's indicating that's just not enough. And you have to have the other appliance side of it, and the emissions and all the economic development, the jobs. That's such an important part of it. And he raised the question that is there the need to create an R&D program for biomass that would require a fuel surcharge? And that's what the oil industry did, I guess, in conjunction with government in some cases for the Energy Administration to direct R&D, research and development dollars into these programs to develop the better appliance and training programs, so on and so forth. So again, relating that experience that the biomass or the oil industry is going through and comparing it to this is maybe where the biomass industry is at this point. He did mention a big successful project they're working on at Fort Drum, which I think is an old military base in New York, where they're converting a large old coal a boiler to use biomass. And he just reinforced the need to have successful examples and projects that other local governments and that other people that are interested can see and say, oh, that works. He mentioned the partnerships necessary. It's just not about government. It's not academia. It's not the private sector, but working together to address those issues. And the other thing that came up a lot in the conference was that we tend to focus a lot on the appliance, like the biomass appliance, the wood burner being efficient and so on and so forth. But this whole idea of the envelope, in other words, the whole design of the house, especially the whole focus on insulation, and weatherization, which again is the focus of a lot of programs, but just moving energy beyond just the appliance to the whole envelope, as they referred to it. The next speaker was Carl Noten, and again, like I mentioned, he is the head of the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, and kind of interestingly, because he came out of this whole U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities came out of the result of the U.S.-Canada Softwood Agreement back in 2008 or 6 or somewhere around there. And basically, for many, many years, there's been an ongoing trade war of sorts, I guess, disagreement between U.S. and Canada, because Canada basically owns all their forests. So in a way, they subsidize that forest for industry, and they can afford to sell their products to the United States at much cheaper because private companies really don't have to buy the land for probably what it's worth. So that becomes a real issue, and I guess this was finally settled with a multi-billion-dollar settlement at one point. And what came out of that, amongst other things, was $200 million that was given for an endowment to for forestry and communities to focus on this forest community development. And that's an endowment, so the money's invested and you have to work off the interest. And I guess the hard luck story that he kind of related to that was that this started in 2008. We all know what happened to the market. They lost a lot of that endowment, and it's been kind of a struggle, but still the market's come back a little bit. So this is basically the largest organization in the U.S. working on sustainable forestry. And the basic premise is that forests are good. We need to retain them. We need economic opportunity to retain those forests. So there's a lot of focus on economic development that's sustainable and sized to the forest community. And it's this idea of linking communities in the forest land to the resource. And the way they've been doing this is just kind of focusing on a few large projects. And one of those is in northeast Georgia, I think it is, Jefferson County, where they're basically working with the community up there through grants and other things that the community is buying an old facility, an old pulp mill, I think, or something like that. I never did get the details exactly on it, but the idea is to use this as a model where the community basically owns a lot of the business. They're invested in it. It's just not some outside corporation coming in. When business gets bad, they pick up and leave, and that's what's happened to a lot of rural pulp mills and so on and so forth. Leaving those communities economically devastated. So the focus of the organization is retaining forests. This whole idea of forest health makes this even more important because of the large increase in insects and disease. But he quoted a statistic that the real need for markets for wood, because 40% of the paper mills have been lost since 1990, which is, of course, again, what happens. Those are mostly those rural communities. Plant up and leaves. It's maybe a larger corporation. And the community is not tied to the business at all. They don't own any part of it or invest it at all. So that's the whole point of that model that they're working on with Jefferson County, to kind of show an organizational model that works in economic development. He commented about emerging markets, basically staying out of the carbon market. That's because that's dead at this point. But he did make the point that basically water will be the oil of the future. And we need to link forests to clean water for, forestry in a sense to survive. And excellent point. Again, economic development aspects of local communities, for regional development. He also commented, one comment I had written down was, or one statistic is that, woody biomass is the largest energy source in the world. Half of the world heats with wood. The problem is that most of them are not in North America. So in terms of things to consider that he mentioned, woody biomass can help with low-value dead and dying trees, again, because you're utilizing that material. And it can help with creating facility that's right sized to the resourcing community. And what he meant by this is that some type of a pulp mill or a log mill, whatever type of forest using facility is in a rural community, instead of making this huge facility that basically is not sustainable, is making so it's sized to the resources that are available. And some of the challenges to this whole economic development in rural areas is just the economic model that's out there now. Most rural development areas, financing for a lot of those businesses and enterprises maybe bringing a 10 or 12% return. Most investors want a lot more than that. Competing with natural gas is a real issue, especially when it comes to biomass, because biomass really can't compete with natural gas in terms of cost, because the cost for natural gas is so low at this point. And then there's a whole issue of distributing, developing forests using businesses that we have this whole thing of public opinion, public that doesn't understand sometimes cutting trees, the emissions issue, and then just the logistics of moving wood. And with diesel at $4 or $5 a gallon, that just becomes more problematic. The real challenges he mentioned, these are three of the things, and I'll get out of this, but were that there's really, this was kind of a caution to the biomass industry, and this has been a problem in the forest industry as well. We have too many voices. You have a lot of fragmented organizations, and there's no central voice or message. And so when you go for legislation and policy, you have these different organizations. This has happened in forestry, like I said. It can happen with the biomass industry. We have their interests, we have this interest, and neither do they meet. So so that's a caution. And the other thing was, don't let the perfect stand in the way of the good. What he meant by this is that they're trying to create, they're trying to create a model for sustainable forest community development that has less to do with efficiency than the correct ownership setup. And I think that goes with a lot of biomass uh, businesses, but biomass applications. We focus a lot on the efficiency and so on, and that kind of thing. But is the setup such that it's sustainable? And finally, don't focus on the what and how, focus on the why. And for example, in terms of the biomass, um, the why is not about carbon. It's really about jobs and health, forest health. I mean, those are the things why it's important. The other things with efficiency and the actual engineering and everything are what follow. But you have to sell it first. Um, that's about all I have to say about that. I thought it was very interesting. He actually had a breakfast session next morning, which he went more into the endowment. But what I have a couple now is a couple of just comments on some of the individual presentations I thought were interesting. And the first breakout on Thursday was entitled Four Talks Here. And they all focused around this idea of financing biomass thermal projects. And one was about a bulk wood pellet, bulk fuel-fed wood pellet central boiler rebate program they have in New Hampshire. Second about the cash flow from the various biomass thermal projects. Energy assistance program dollars. And this is the whole LIHEAP program, which I was really not familiar with prior to this. That's the low-income heating assistance program that most every state has. It comes from federal money and state money. And then finally, some of the state and federal incentive projects, programs that are out there. And what I want to do is just make a couple quick comments about a couple of the talks. The first one was this one that New Hampshire is developing this bulk fuel program. And this idea that it's kind of a chicken and egg syndrome. And I made the point earlier that until pellets can become a deliverable commodity, in other words, anybody, you don't have to carry 40-pound bags. People come and get a delivery of pellets in their basement, which would, fuel a boiler, little boiler. It's really not going to take off. So they're trying to get this model going in New Hampshire, and it's a chicken and egg syndrome, such that consumers won't invest in new systems without the infrastructure, that is the delivery network and so on. But you're not going to get the infrastructure without the demand. So they've tried to incentivize programs to validate the system, and the fuel, as well as the setup. So, and the way it works is like this. They basically have a rebate program where they pay 30% of the installation of a pellet boiler system in the house. It's for central heating only now, as well as the labor, and cap it at $6,000. What they said, most of these systems cost about $18,000. So you're still having to come up with about $12,000. Bulk delivery is a minimum of 3 tons, so that's how big that hopper has to be. And apparently it's getting some traction, and they're just trying to get this whole system and delivery enterprise, this whole infrastructure going such that it will take off on its own as soon as people see that it can work. This other one on financing biomass thermal projects, I don't have a lot to say about it, except that the one point I got out of this that I thought was very interesting to remember is that what he said, and this is looking at cash flow and other factors like that, it takes about 110 to 150 customers to support one pellet delivery truck. So, that's that whole point. You need the systems out there to support the delivery, but you're not going to get delivery. You're not. It works both ways, is what I'm saying. So that's an interesting number to keep in mind. The other talk there was about energy assistance program dollars, buy more heat with wood. And this is again about the LIHEAP program, which is an acronym for low income heating assistance program. And this is a national program, 3.5 billion, of which only 1.2% is used at this time for wood and coal. And wood is eligible, with pellets and wood apparently. And most of it goes into gas and oil, heat and things like that, and some appliance repair apparently. But an average payment of $308 for each household. And again, this is very much helps our elderly population. And the point he made, this John Strimling, is that you can buy basically twice as much heating with wood compared to oil. There are a lot of roadblocks because people don't understand it, and all this kind of thing, especially policymakers. Um, but it is a good vehicle for increasing the awareness of the broader message of biomass. And he just made the point that it's time for people in the biomass industry and others associated with this to start talking with people in their state about ways to basically you know, do more with biomass in terms of the LIHEAP program. Uh, the final thing on state and federal incentives, this was, I really not going to mention too much about it because some of these programs, they're interesting, but the PACE program, for example, just said it's property assessed clean energy. And this is where basically it's a local government type thing, and dollars are paid by the local government, to basically, install a biomass system and things like that. And then the homeowner pays back through property taxes. With our economy the way it is, that's probably not real likely. And this other one, this rural energy program rural energy for America programs, is part of the Farm Bill, and whether that'll be in their future, they don't know. And one thing I'll mention about that, when I was talking about Carlton Owens about the fact that there's a lot of voices, real success story there is to look at agriculture. There is a Farm Bill. There is no forestry bill. So there's a huge farm bill, even though you have many different sections of agriculture. They come together and have been very, very effective at a single message. So it's something worth mentioning. On the second breakout of the first day, there was a whole session on existing buildings and biomass heat. And it was kind of looking at retrofitting existing residential buildings and commercial buildings with these biomass heating systems. And some of this had to do with LEED, which is whether they're LEED certified, standards and certification for the biomass industry, building local cordwood and wood pellet industry. And a lot of this I'm not going to say too much about because I didn't get to see some of these for some other reasons. But again, the PDFs on all these will be available. The fact is that there's a lot of existing residential and commercial buildings out there. And the question is, who's going to do that installation, and how well is it going to be done? And I know that I'll just mention here. One speaker talked about standards certification for the biomass industry, and he said, this is interesting because this is a company that does building performance, certification, things like that for various industries, I guess. But basically, he said there's more requirements to become a cosmetologist in New York State than to become a biomass installer, and which is kind of sad. So what happens to when a hairdresser makes a mistake? Well, not good if you've ever had somebody who's had a bad hair day, I guess. But how about a biomass installer, a bad system? You're stuck with it. So he's making the point that the industry really needs standards and certification for biomass installers, and developing a service provider pool, which I guess apparently has an average age of 47. And it's not just certification, but accreditation, even a higher standard, so that people have confidence in these installations. They know they're going to work, and they know that they're going to be supported. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I guess the Building Performance Institute is one of those organizations that can help an industry do that. I guess there's some others as well. The only other one I'll mention is with Cornell. They've done a lot of work with some 24 demo homes in terms of weatherization and heating, and basically very good. They're just getting back some of the results, but just from 5 of those 24 homes, an average savings of $2,000 to $2,500. And comments like, first time I've been warm in years, and so on. So kind of interesting. And the end of the day, basically, they had a kind of interesting thing in the exhibit area where they had these lightning round presentations. There was 12 presenters. They each had 3 minutes, and most of them kept right to their time, and they were just up in front of the group and just kind of went one to the other and talked about all these different things that are mentioned here, and you could follow up with the speaker later on around the hors d'oeuvres that were served right after. So that was very nice. My only suggestion maybe for the planning group is that you really need to keep the noise down in the rest of the exhibit hall if this is indeed going to take place, because it could be very hard to hear sometimes. But there was a lot of interesting things there. So you can see some of those things. And again, if you go to the website, you can see the speakers associated with these if you want to get more information. The only other thing here, like on the second day, there was a plenary session. Personally, I didn't find these as interesting. It was kind of more about, these are the programs that the Forest Service is doing, and then so on and so forth, the USDA Rural Development. I thought the gentleman from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry was kind of interesting. They've got doing some neat things in Pennsylvania, but it was a little more on the bureaucratic side, and I think two of those were via live video feed, and I think whenever you do that, that's not as good in terms of being a participant in a conference. The day two, the breakout sessions were I think the general session was on education outreach and promoting local heating solutions. And Guillermo Metz with Cornell Extension talked about educating community members about the benefits of biomass, something they've been involved with media and brochures and so on. And Jeff Ford was very interesting because he had some real down-to-earth information. He does feasibility assessments for biomass projects, but he knew the messages that community leaders needed to hear. And I'll mention that in just a few minutes. Very tied into what the message should be. And then the third speaker was a really great speaker from the University of Maryland. Just kidding, but I gave a talk about the Maryland Wood Energy Coalition that I've been working with in Maryland, trying to get biomass thermal energy included in state energy policy and so on. I'll just say a word about that. Just a few comments about Jeff Ford. For those of you who are looking for the messages, if you're going to talk to a school system, if you're going to talk to local governments, he in his PowerPoint presentation had some really great key questions and issues addressing emissions and kind of giving you a way to kind of to discuss it. I think it was very effective. And he provided some case studies as well. And he's been very successful. And a lot he does with his Yellowwood Associates, I guess, is actually, I don't think that he's under contract, I think, with the Forest Service as well, but basically do assessments, initial feasibility assessments, to see if it's even prudent to even move forward with the biomass project. So good nuts and bolts advice for dealing with local governments. The talk I gave was, again, about our statewide wood energy coalition. Just recently we developed a 20-page research prospectus that answers a lot of the questions about about how to increase the adoption of biomass or wood energy in the state of Maryland. And you may find it interesting. Our website there is naturalresources.umd.edu, and a lot of the information in here could be very useful for any state. The Pinchot Institute actually did the actual writing and researching of a lot of it, and so it's a very good document. It's kind of, for those who've ever read, saw Jerry Maguire, it's kind of like, have you read my memo? That's kind of almost what it is. It's like short and to the point, but objective. Finally, the closing plenary session was kind of a candid discussion with experts, and you can see they represent that whole professional side of architects and engineers, as well as people in government dealing with sustainability programs, and as researchers. And they kind of revamped and went over a lot of the issues of trying to get professionals, architects and so on, educated, get them into this whole biomass stream, and some of the other difficulties associated with sustainability of biomass and all the other questions that came up. I didn't really take any notes on that, but I'm not sure if there's going to be anything on as a follow-up on the website or not. Just to give you an idea of the 3 special sessions, I mentioned the 3 general sessions, and that's what I just talked about. There are also 3 special sessions, like I said, for architects and engineers and HVAC professionals, and these are the titles of those 3. And again, I imagine there will be, and then there was like 3 or 4 presentations under each of these. So you may want to look at some of these and look at some of those presentations online. They may be of a lot of interest to you. Um, but very good stuff, no question about it. Just as one person, I couldn't be everywhere. So key principles for biomass heating systems, alternative approaches to system sizing and operation, and building a team for successful integration. The other special session, 3 special sessions, were for economic development specialists. And my understanding from a few people I talked to that involved with the conference is that they were less successful they would have hoped in terms of attracting those professionals as well as economic development specialists. But the economic development aspect dealt with district heating, biomass, combined heat and power, and financing biomass thermal projects on a larger scale. Finally, I guess the finishing the conference, most everybody had left. It's always interesting when you have the local congressman come, and there's probably a conference that had 450 people, and there's probably 20, 30 people sitting in the room. But he was a very interesting gentleman, very much akin to the interest. But even his comments, I must say, originally, initial comments dealt with actually more about solar energy than biomass. But obviously, he was very interested in the topic. And there was an interesting post-conference schedule with Scott Williamson, who I think is a service installer for biomass, on creating a biomass heating service standard. And one thing he sent out is, it's kind of interesting, a lot of community colleges now, they have training programs for solar and wind technology people, for service providers, but none of them have anything for biomass. And that just speaks to the political climate I think we're in now, and who's been very effective at catching the politician's ear. I guess finally, as a newbie in biomass, probably the last 3 years, I was kind of excited because I think the organization that sponsors this conference in the biomass industry, they have a vision for increasing renewable biomass energy in the Northeast and extending it out. I do kind of wonder about the name biomass. People in the industry understand it. I'm not sure if politicians understand it. I just wonder maybe there's a better word like wood energy or something. But I would say this is a place to learn about the industry, how it's changing. It does have momentum and spirit. And as a forester and person who deals in the logging industry as well, I wonder about the idea of considering including CFE credits and presentations that might address the supply side with regards to sustainability. Since that's a part of the industry, it focused mostly on the appliance and the service provider end. So I am going next year. There's no question about that. As long as I can handle it, I definitely want to do that. That's, I think, about what I have right now. I see there's a couple questions.